Now, here's a point of contention for many papers, the data analysis plan within the methods section. So the data analysis plan is going to help us follow and interpret the results before we even see the results, right? So it's telling the reader, what to expect in terms of data analysis. So data analysis is a process, right? So here, it's a longer process because it's a mixed methods analysis, right? So we're going to describe each phase of the mixed methods analysis. And of course, in the checks of data integrity, you need to mention that. That's what makes a study look very professional, because they're needed, they're often neglected. So when you make sure to mention them, you look like you know what you're doing. And of course, the data are not sound without them. So just break it down very simply. So data analysis will be conducted in 4 phases. Okay, so first, we have our qualitative data, which will be content coded and organized into themes and subthemes. Right, very simple. Qualitative data reflecting barriers to class attendance will be used to create quantitative items, so the influence of barriers may be related to class attendance statistically. We mentioned that a bit in the instrument section, but there's nothing wrong with mentioning it again. Okay, second, now here we're getting into our quantitative analysis. So second, data will be analyzed descriptively, otherwise known as univariate analysis. Then third, the relationships between the dependent variable, class attendance, and all the predictors, the independent and covariate variables, are examined using bivariate analysis, right, just like in week 2. So fourth, the predictor variables associated with the dependent variable at a statistically significant level, p is less than 0.05, are going to be entered together in a multiple linear regression model, right, which will indicate which is the strongest predictor of class attendance. Then here we go with the checks. So prior to quantitative analysis, all the necessary checks of test assumptions, homoscedasticity, normality, multicollinearity, linearity, right, all related to our parametric testing, were checked, and then they were satisfied. Second, and some quantitative papers include this and some don't, but a power analysis indicated 85 participants, which we have more than that, gave us sufficient statistical power to detect a medium-sized effect in a multiple linear regression model using 4 predictors. Right, another check of data integrity, missing data. Do we have any missing data? How much missing data do we have, right? We want to list that. And then, like we said, anything relating to instrument validity or reliability, we want to list, from prior studies, as well as any psychometric properties such as a Cronbach's alpha, all mentioned here. Right, then we have our results. Now the results are presented in both tables and text. Right? So the text is just describing the tables and the findings. Now in the mixed method study, the results could be separate. Right? You could have a quantitative results section and a qualitative results section, connected, right? Such as our qualitative suggested class instructor should be examined, right? Or merged, such as where we use the qualitative data to create our quantitative barriers variable, and tested that against class attendance. Right? So all these things will differ by study design, right? The mixed method study design that we went over in the mixed methods week. Right? Of course, the analysis is going to vary according to the needs of the study. Like, for example, here in our data analysis plan, we mentioned we were looking at quantitative first. Right? So usually with our explanatory study, they mention qualitative first. But for us, it's just easier to mention qualitative first because we want to describe the barriers to class that are being coded. So here we go, Table 1. We're presenting our qualitative findings, right? We have each theme and each sub-theme below it, and the number and percentage of residents that express data reflecting each. Then again, we have our overall description of theme 1, just like we did in the week we looked at qualitative analysis, right? We say what the theme is, and then we talk about the sub-themes, and then below that, we actually talk about the sub-themes specifically, mention the number and percentage of residents within each, and then give some quotes at the bottom, right? The quotes are reflecting or supporting the theme, right? Giving an example of it. Then again, we have our next sub-theme. We describe it. We have our quote. I'm not going to go into it too deeply because we looked at this during our qualitative analysis week, right? Then we have theme 2, and we mentioned this, sub-themes. Then we present the sub-themes, the number percentage that mention data reflecting them, and the quotes. Right, and there we go. So from there, we'll move on to our univariate analysis, which is the first phase of the quantitative analysis. So right, here we go. We just have an APA style. We have all the data presented for the descriptive analysis of categorical study variables for Table 2. And this should look very, very familiar because we went over it in week 2. Right? Then also we have the barriers to class. Right? So this is the actual qualitative data made into a quantitative variable for analysis. So we show how many people are within each category. Right? And then we have, lastly, our instructor, class instructor. Now, here's where we have the text. Now, the first thing to remember about the text is make it terse. Now, generally, people don't like to write a lot about statistics like this because it could drone on for paragraphs. But that's okay because the reader doesn't want to read, you know, a lot of writing about statistics. They like to look at the tables, right? So you should try to make the writing terse and just refer to, you know, the major categories within each variable, right? Like, so for example, 40% of residents had their doctor not prescribed class, 30% had it recommended, 30% reported that class was prescribed, right? So it's just like the major points. If there was all tiny little categories, you don't have to list them all in the text. You could just say, these were the major categories, you know, and see the text for, see the tables for more detail. Right, so then we have Table 3, which is our descriptive analysis of the continuous study variables. So we have the mean standard deviation, min-max, the highest and lowest scores, and the possible scale range. So we could attribute, you know, so if the mean is 3.69, you know, out of 0 to 7, and we know that's around the middle, right? If there were 10 days in the week and the mean was 3.69, it'd be closer to a third. Right? So it's good to know the range. You know, a slight discussion, right? So a little text. Table 3 presents descriptive analysis, the continuous variables, right? Data indicated the average resident went to class about 4 days per week, right? And that's all it needs to be. Now, going on to phase 2 of quantitative analysis is our bivariate analysis. Now, what's interesting is you'll see in Table 4, we can combine. So we had a bunch of t-tests and a bunch of ANOVAs, right? You can imagine if you needed a table for each, it would be too darn long, right? So you can actually make one table that includes all the t-tests and ANOVAs, right? For example, Table 4, bivariate analysis of class attendance and the categorical variables, right? So the first one, class assignment, right? And you see going across the top, we have the N, the number in each category. the mean, so we know if it was significant, which we see under P, the P value was significant because it's less than 0.05. We need to know the mean to see which was significantly higher or lower. And then before the P, we have the value of the T for the t-test, or the value of F for the one-way ANOVA. And then below, where it says doctor prescribed class, that's a one-way ANOVA because it has more than two categorical, two categories within the categorical variable. Right? And you'll notice under the degrees of freedom, it's reported as a ratio, 2 to 97, where for the t-test above it, it's just reported as one number, 98. That's the sample minus 2 degrees of freedom. And also for the one-way ANOVA, recall if the P is significant, that means the test is significant. So for the one-way ANOVA, the P is 0.002, which is significant, but recall again, we don't know which means are significantly or higher or lower than the other, so we put an asterisk in the case where it's significant, and we say in the bottom, the footnote, the Bonferroni test said the yes category was significantly higher than the no category. So we have all the bases covered. And it's very, like I said, terse. The person doesn't have to read the text. They could look at that table and they know what all the results are right away, very clearly. And that's how the table should be. Right, barriers to class. We could see all the way to the right under P. The significance is 0.84, which means it's not statistically significant. So we don't need to consider anything else in that test. And then again, ending with our t-test for the class instructor, where we see it's significant under 0.001, and the higher mean was Miss Albright. So she had a significantly higher rate of attendance at her classes than Miss Gettenline. And then, of course, we have Table 4 presented in text, right? So Table 4 presents the analysis between class attendance and categorical variables, and then we list each one. Right, so you can see the t-test could just be one sentence. So the t-test indicated residents assigned in Miss Albright's class went at a higher rate, there's the mean, relative to Miss Gettenline's, there's the mean. And then at the end, we have the statistical notation for the t-test, right? So it's t equals a value of t, 3.76, with the degrees of freedom in the parentheses, 98, and the p-value. So one sentence describes the entire test and results. Then we need a separate table, Table 5, right, bivariate analysis for the continuous variables, the continuous class attendance with the continuous variables. Then if you go across the top, it says variables, and we have 1, 2, 3, which corresponds to the 1, 2, 3 going downward, class attendance, age, and enjoyment. So at the intersection is the correlation between each variable. So where class attendance intersects with 2, that's the correlation between class attendance and age, and 3 is the intersection of class attendance and enjoyment. So we can see from the asterisks, they're both statistically significant. Now we see that number 2, the 27 is negative, which means as class attendance goes, well, as specifically as class enjoyment goes up, class attendance goes down, or pardon me, as age, right, just testing you now, you should be able to correct me at this point, 2, right, 2. As age goes up, 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 the negative means class attendance goes down, 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 right? Now 3, where there's no minus and it's positive, that means as class enjoyment goes up, 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 class attendance also goes up, up, up. And then we just present Table 5 as Table 5 presents the analysis of class attendance and the continuous predictor variables. Then we say one sentence, Pearson correlation relieved class attendance was correlated with class enjoyment and age, right? So very succinct. And we might put another sentence in describing, the nature of the relationship, as we said, as one goes up, the other goes down, as one goes up, the other goes up. But again, very terse, because people generally can read the statistics so they can look at it and know immediately what it's indicating. And finally, we have our linear regression, the big kahuna, that's going to tell us which is the strongest predictor. Right? And again, we've looked at this in several other weeks, and we can see at the bottom, class instructor is statistically significant and has the biggest PES, partial eta squared, so it has the biggest effect size. So that's our significant, strongest predictor. And we could say that in text, right? So table 6 presents multiple linear regression, examining class attendance, indicated, right? So we want to next say, indicated the overall model was significant, because if it wasn't, the individual predictors wouldn't matter. Then also mention, the R squared. Right? So the model explained over 70% of the variance in class attendance. So those are the first 3 statements in the text. Then the next statements might refer to the individual predictors, right? For example, we saw that class instructor was the strongest predictor. And you might mention the other individual predictors too, just like this. So our discussion. So of course, discussion, we're evaluating and interpreting the findings of the study. Right? So the first statement might be, if we have a hypothesis, was the hypothesis supported or not supported, right? And next, we also want to talk about the limitations, the shortcomings of the study. So for our sample study, we might say, study findings did not support the study hypothesis that postulated class assignment was the strongest predictor of attendance. Specifically, analysis indicated class instructor was the strongest predictor of attendance, right? So right off the bat, that's the take-home message. And so after we discuss that a little further, then we talk about the limitations. Now, every study has limitations. They're often stated in a polite way, so as not to, make the study not sound comprehensive and valid, right? So the study incorporates several limitations. For example, the design did not examine if residents practice meditation at home or at another class, right? So if they did that, that might impact their actual attendance, right? So that was not examined, so that's a limitation. And the conclusion, right, is going to be a reasonable and accurate statement based on the implications of the findings, right? So based upon what the findings infer, but we don't want to go beyond those boundaries, right? And then we want to suggest future research. And so we want to say for our study, for example, right, that class instructors seemed important, but we don't want to say every single meditation class in existence should focus on, the class instructor as a way to enhance the class attendance. And so for us, we might say, the finding that the preference of meditation class instructor had a dramatic impact on attendance suggests, and that's a big word, suggests, it's not saying we should or shouldn't do anything, it's suggesting that future research should examine this topic farther. Specifically, future research might benefit from incorporating a qualitative piece that probes specific traits that engage attendees, right? So we know that there was a preference and even some traits were mentioned, but it wasn't systematically measured or examined with our qualitative questions. What do you like about the instructor? What about the instructor keeps you coming back to class? That would be interesting. It wasn't measured, so future research might address it. Now, I have some important points here. Right? First of all, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Right? Listen to the voice of others while finding your own. So one of the best ways of writing up these studies is to look at published reports and articles. Look what the authors report, their findings, how it's written up, discussions, conclusions, right? See what you like about that, what you might choose to adopt or emulate, what style you like, right? So that's the best way often to develop your writing skills in a certain area like mixed methods. So you might want to look at a journal like the Journal of Mixed Methods Research, right? So that has two types of studies. It has actual mixed method studies, and it has articles that describe mixed methods itself, its use, its appropriateness, and things like that. So it's very informative. Now, as we started out with, right, we're bookending this because this is just about the first thing we mentioned when we started our class. Mixed methods is a great way to have fidelity to the perspective of the study participant, which is a primary concern. That's what we want, right? We're trying to get the perspective of the study participant. So if they could provide us quantitative, data telling us about themselves, but then qualitative data, expressing that further, that might be the best way to get the perspective. Now, it's always great, to value that data from the study participant, to almost like relish it, because if we didn't have them providing us data, we wouldn't have a study to perform, right? So that's why having fidelity and respect for the data is so important. So you might say, there was a song in 1964 where they said, people who need people are the luckiest people of all. So in 2015, we might say researchers who need people are the luckiest researchers of all, right? Because when you realize you need the people providing your data, right, and relish their perspectives, that often, and it may or may not apply, but you be the judge, that often produces the best research. So specifically, often, it may be useful to put yourself in the shoes of the study participant, right? What's it like to be them? What are their joys, worries, challenges, right? So if we really want to understand the participant, like in our sample study, we might say, okay, I'm 65 or older, living in a retirement community, right? And they want me to attend these meditation classes. What's my day like? When I wake up, what do I first do? What do I first need? Right? What am I thinking? What are my thoughts? What are my concerns? How might I interpret these meditation classes as a benefit, as a burden, right? And mixed methods is a powerful way to do that because we're trying to get the perspective of each person in a multi-dimensional fashion. Right? So this is just food for thought. Right? So we've examined how both quantitative and qualitative methods have specific limitations, right? In our first few weeks. We've discussed how each method actually compensates for limitations posed by the other. So both methods have strengths, both methods have limitations, but the combination of the two addresses the limitations. So you end up with a good number of strengths. Okay? So that's our thought process. So we might wonder if a truly well-rounded researcher might need to be versed in both methods. So that's the thought I will leave off with in this program. Thank you for attending the classes, and feel free to send any questions. All righty. Bye-bye.